Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens when we post or share photos of someone who has passed away? For many, it just seems like a way to honor them, but there's a very fine line between respect and exploitation. In a time when everything is shared, it's easy to forget that an image carries stories, feelings, and even pain that hasn't disappeared. Some actions, even if they seem harmless, can deeply affect those left behind. There are cases where simply posting an old image awakens traumas in family members, or spreads information that the person would never have authorized while alive. When Stephen Hawking passed away, for example, many images and montages were made without any consideration. Many of them circulate to this day, out of context and even with messages he never would have endorsed. And that's when the question that almost no one asks arises: is there an ethical limit on the use of these images? The emotional impact of seeing photos of someone who has passed goes far beyond a simple memory. For some people, seeing these images published unexpectedly can bring pain, anger, or even a sense of violation. This is especially true when the original intention of the post is distorted, used to manipulate emotions or generate engagement. What few people know is that there are clear guidelines in many cultures on how to deal with these visual memories. In some traditions, images of the dead should not be publicly displayed without prior consent. In the case of public figures like Hawking, the issue becomes even more sensitive. Although he left a remarkable legacy, the way his image is used after his death still causes controversy. If you're enjoying this content and want more reflections like this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue producing responsibly and respectfully. The reckless use of an image of someone deceased can turn into a moral mistake even when it comes from good intentions. There are families who have never recovered from the impact of seeing intimate photos circulating on social media. There are many cases where these images end up edited, manipulated, or taken out of context, causing public embarrassment or even damage to the reputation of a person who can no longer defend themselves. Stephen Hawking, for example, had his image associated with phrases he never said, spread as if they were his teachings. It's a type of silent disrespect that many have normalized without realizing it. The memory of someone who has passed deserves care, not unrestrained exposure. Grief is a delicate process, and any unauthorized use of images can reopen deep wounds. Before sharing, it's essential to ask yourself, what is the real purpose of this? Are we honoring or just satisfying an impulse? Another point that is rarely discussed is the issue of intellectual and symbolic legacy. In the case of Stephen Hawking, his image is linked to ideas, discoveries, and messages that he dedicated his entire life to building. When a photo of him is used superficially, in memes or dubious montages, it reduces his entire trajectory to mere visual content. It's like turning a masterpiece into wrapping paper. And this can happen to anyone, famous or not. The digitalization of life has made us lose the notion that some memories should be preserved intimately. There are images that belong only to family, close friends, the sphere of affection, and not to public consumption. The deceased no longer has a voice to say how they want to be remembered, so this responsibility falls on us. And we are not always prepared for that. It's important to remember that the right to one's image continues to exist even after death. Legally, the heirs may have the power to prevent or authorize the disclosure of photos, especially if they involve commercial or defamatory use. But beyond the law, there is ethics, which should come before any decision. When we share an image of someone who has passed, we are shaping how they will be remembered by future generations. If we do this lightly, we run the risk of tarnishing what should be preserved with respect. With Stephen Hawking, this was evident in many moments after his death. Some publications used his figure to defend ideas he would never support. Others just to attract clicks. We cannot normalize this. There is a limit between honoring and exploiting. And that limit is easier to cross than you might think. Old photos, especially those taken in intimate or fragile moments, should not be treated as disposable content. Each image carries a context that cannot be accurately reconstructed by an outsider. A smile may hide pain, a look may carry fatigue, and a pose may have been forced by obligation. When these records reach the internet, they lose the protection of affection and become loose pieces in a sea of judgments. In the case of Hawking, there are photos of him in hospitals, delicate moments that he probably wouldn't want to see circulating without consideration. And if this happens with him, one of the greatest names in modern science, imagine with ordinary people. The trivialization of visual memories has become a reflection of our haste to publish without thinking, but it is possible to regain respect for these images. Just start looking at them with more responsibility. The responsibility we have with the images of those who have passed is not limited to the moment of posting, but also to what it provokes afterward. Each share is like a new exhibition, a new look cast on a memory that may not have been public. Many children, grandchildren and spouses feel invaded when they see a family photo being debated by strangers. This is not an exaggeration. It's a legitimate reaction to loss. When it comes to well-known figures like Stephen Hawking, the complexity increases. He was a global symbol, but he was also a father, husband, friend. And these personal dimensions are not always respected when his image is used. Some people argue that public figures have lost the right to privacy. But does death really erase all boundaries? The digital age demands a new ethic, a revision of what we call freedom of expression. Not everything that is possible should be done. We live in a time when the speed of information surpasses reflection. A photo appears, moves, goes viral, and disappears in a matter of hours. But the impact it causes remains in those who lived alongside that person. In Hawking's case, some images spread with false captions, as if they were spiritual declarations made by him before his death. This confused many, even sincere admirers. The intention may have been to inspire, but the effect was to distort. And this happens every day with ordinary people. Photos are taken out of context and used to validate ideas, create narratives, and manipulate emotions. That's where the risk lies. When we lose care with the origin and the context, we also lose the truth. Honoring someone who has passed requires more than a click. It requires consideration, silence when necessary, and above all, respect for what that person represented in life. The debate on the use of photos of the deceased also touches on a question of identity. After death, the image is what remains visible to many. It is through it that the memory stays alive, but it is also through it that one can lie. It is not uncommon for people to have their photos used in fake ads, sensationalist stories, or even conspiracy theories. Stephen Hawking was the target of many of these abuses, such as when they used his image to illustrate ideas he fought against. This shows how much society needs to discuss what is memory and what is exploitation. Not every use of an image is a tribute. Sometimes it's just an act of convenience, and if that convenience overrides the truth, we are disrespecting not only the deceased, but also those who loved them. Someone's image should not become a tool for someone else's narrative. It deserves to be kept with dignity. It is indeed possible to remember with fondness, share memorable moments, and even keep alive the symbolic presence of someone. But this needs to be done with discretion. When publishing a photo of someone who has passed away, think if you would like something similar to be done with your image in the future. This simple reflection changes the way we relate to the memory of others. Stephen Hawking left dozens of public records that celebrate his intelligence, his overcoming, and his contribution to science. But he also left private moments that don't need to become content. The same goes for every father, mother, friend, or grandparent who has passed away. It is important to distinguish what is personal memory from what is public exposure. An image can comfort, but it can also hurt. Therefore, caring for photos of the deceased is an act of empathy with the living, and of respect for those who can no longer decide for themselves. In many homes there are albums that have never been digitized, photos kept with care, protected from time and exposure. They carry stories that only make sense to those who lived alongside those portrayed there. This type of preservation has value, as it does not transform memories into content. With the internet, we lost part of that emotional filter. Everything becomes public, often without reflection. In Hawking's case, it is understandable that his image is present in educational materials, biographies, and official tributes. But when it starts to illustrate jokes, false phrases, or ideological disputes, we are crossing a dangerous border. It's not censorship, it's awareness. Someone's life is not reduced to a photograph, and death should not be used as justification to disrespect what that person was. It's time to reflect more deeply on this. There is also the issue of permanence. Once on the internet, a photo can remain forever, even if the person who published it later regrets it. Therefore, the care must come before, at the moment of decision. In the case of figures like Stephen Hawking, this risk is multiplied as any wrong publication spreads on a global scale. But the same applies to any ordinary citizen. A decontextualized image can become the target of jokes, malicious comments, or manipulations. And who will protect that memory? That responsibility is in the hands of whoever publishes. Therefore, before posting, it is worth thinking, does this image honor or expose? Does it preserve or wear out? Does it comfort or hurt? The future of collective memory depends on these small daily choices, because remembering someone with dignity is one of the most sincere ways to keep their essence alive among us. There's also an important distinction between public use and commercial use of images of those who have passed away. While the former may stem from a feeling of tribute or longing, the latter often involves financial interests. When Stephen Hawking's image is used to sell products, promote ideas, or generate profit without authorization from his family or the institution responsible for his legacy, there is a clear abuse of memory. With ordinary people, this also happens on a smaller scale but with equal gravity. Photos of the deceased are used by companies, websites, or social networks as a way to attract attention or audience. The lack of clear legislation in many countries facilitates this type of exploitation, and even when there are laws, enforcement is limited. Therefore, the role of each person as a guardian of memory becomes even more essential. It is not enough to just avoid mistakes. It is necessary to actively protect the symbolic value of those who have passed away. The advancement of artificial intelligence has also brought new ethical questions about the use of the image of the deceased. It is now possible to recreate voices, facial expressions, and even movements based on old photos. And these technologies have been used without the slightest consideration, generating fake videos or simulations that stir up the emotion of the public. Stephen Hawking, being a global icon, has already been simulated in several productions that had nothing to do with his mission in life. And this tends to grow. But what if this is done with someone from our family? When they create a false speech or image of someone we love, this possibility is not as distant as it seems. Therefore, it is urgent to discuss limits. Ethics needs to accompany technology and not run after it after the damage. Preserving memory begins with respect for what the person was, and it ends with the care of what should not be manipulated. It is essential to remember that not everything needs to be published. Some images were made only to keep, not to circulate. They belong to an intimate moment, to a silent conversation between those who left and those who remained. Making them public can break this invisible pact. Many families have records that tell deep stories, but choose to keep these records away from networks. That's wisdom. That's respect. Stephen Hawking had his image immortalized for his contribution to science, but there are photos and moments that have never been disclosed by conscious choice of those who knew him. Not everything needs to become a post. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to preserve in silence what matters most. When the rush to share overrides the value of remembrance, we lose what is most human. We need to relearn how to keep. Memory also lives in unexposed spaces. The cultural impact of the irresponsible use of images cannot be ignored either. When we normalize the distorted use of photos of the deceased, we teach new generations that everything can be transformed into content. This trivialization creates a less sensitive, less careful, less empathetic society. The legacy of figures like Hawking runs the risk of being rewritten by memes and false phrases instead of their real contributions. With ordinary people, the risk is complete erasure. When photos circulate out of context, the true story of the person disappears, and all that remains is a loose image without meaning. Educating the youngest about this is part of the responsibility of those who live in this time of transition. It's not about fear or censorship, it's about reverence. teaching that each image keeps a life, and that life, even after death, deserves to be treated with dignity. The decision to share a photo should always consider the impact it will have on those who see it. In times when everything is measured by likes, it's easy to forget the value of silence. Stephen Hawking taught us that time is relative, but respect is not. It doesn't change with fashion, nor with technology. It remains. When we choose to respect someone's memory, we are contributing to a more conscious culture. We are saying that a person's story cannot be used as a tool for clicks. We are remembering that there is a line between what can and what should, and that crossing it can have profound emotional consequences. Each image you post is a reflection of your values, and in the face of death, these values become even more evident. Think about it before pressing the share button. Sometimes the best gesture is to keep to yourself what matters most. It is necessary to recognize that to err is human. Many have already shared images of deceased people without reflecting on the consequences. But there is always time to learn and change. The goal here is not to blame, but to invite awareness. Each one can review their attitudes and adopt more respectful postures from now on. If you have already shared something without thinking, you can delete it. You can explain. You can do differently next time. Stephen Hawking said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. This also applies to how we deal with the memory of others. We don't need to keep repeating the same mistakes just because everyone does. Honoring the life of someone who has passed is a daily choice, and it starts with small gestures: a photo saved, a post avoided, a silent respect. This is how we keep alive the dignity of those who have passed. Even as technology advances and customs change, respect for the dead remains an essential value in any culture. It is not about attachment to the past, but about recognizing that memory is a collective construction made of individual choices. Stephen Hawking left an immense legacy, but what was most impressive about his trajectory was the clarity with which he defended knowledge, truth, and intellectual integrity. Using his image carelessly or for purposes contrary to these values is to betray what he represented. And the same goes for anyone who has lived with honesty and dignity. Each of us carries stories that deserve to be remembered with care. And this starts with the simple act of thinking before publishing. It doesn't cost anything, but it can avoid a lot of damage. A society that respects its dead builds a more noble present and a more sensible future. It is also important to understand that honoring someone does not require exposure. Sometimes the most sincere tributes happen in silence, in a prayer, in a memory kept with affection. The need to publicly prove that we miss them often arises more from social pressure than from a genuine desire. There are those who publish photos with long texts without ever having said goodbye personally. This reveals a symbolic use of the image of the deceased that is not connected with the truth of the relationship. When this is repeated, a void is created. The tribute becomes an enactment. Respect becomes appearance. And memory is lost in this game of vanities. There is no problem in wanting to remember. The problem is transforming the memory into a stage. The best tribute we can pay to those who have passed is to continue with dignity, preserving what was sacred to that person in life. The feelings aroused by an image are real and should be respected. A simple photo can provoke crying, longing, anger, or even peace. But when it is disclosed out of context, these feelings become confused. Many family members report that seeing photos of loved ones on social networks without warning or preparation was an unexpected trigger of pain. That is why the care with the publication should be threefold: with the person who left, with those who lived with them, and with those who will receive this image. Stephen Hawking lived under the eyes of the world, but that does not mean that his intimacy became public domain. On the contrary, his genius was accompanied by a private life that he valued, and this must also be remembered after his death. Ethics does not end with the last breath. It continues in every act we do in the name of those who are no longer here. When someone leaves, what remains is what we let live in our attitudes. And one of these attitudes is the way we take care of memory, keeping a photo with care, avoiding spreading images of vulnerable moments, choosing carefully what to share. All this reveals how much we have learned about empathy and respect. There is no perfect manual, but there is common sense. There is sensitivity. And there is the choice to act more consciously each day. Stephen Hawking taught us about the universe, time, and the limits of the human condition, but his greatest teaching may have been perseverance with dignity. May this serve as an example also for the way we treat his memory, and the memory of all who have passed through our lives. Because in the end, we will all be just a memory. The question is, what kind of memory we want to leave, and how we want it to be taken care of. If you have photos of someone who has passed away, look at them with respect. Ask yourself if that image really needs to be in the world, or if it belongs only to your heart. The world doesn't need to see everything. Sometimes, the most beautiful thing is precisely what is kept. An old photo can be an intimate treasure, a silent conversation with someone who is no longer here. And if you decide to share it, may it be with awareness, with honesty, with true love. Because an image can also be an act of affection when published with the care it deserves. This is the true tribute, not likes, not shares, but the certainty that you have respected someone's memory until the end. And you have been inspired by this to live better as well. The way we treat the dead says a lot about who we are in life, and about the type of legacy we will leave. If this reflection made sense to you, consider sharing this video with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe to the channel to follow other content like this, always made with responsibility and respect for memory and life. Remembering someone is not just looking back, it is also building in the present a more ethical, more sensitive, and more just attitude. May we together promote a more careful look at what we publish, about how we talk about those who have passed, and about what we want to preserve. The internet doesn't need to be a place of carelessness. It can be a space of true memory, and you can be part of that. With each choice, each posting, each respected silence, we help build a world that honors the living and those who have already passed. And this starts with a simple question. Does this memory deserve the world or just my heart?